Trigger warning. The following episode of Mikey on Mute contains talk about sexual assault, suicide attempts, suicidal ideation, hospitalization, self-harm, eating disorders, and other topics that may be triggering or unsettling to certain listeners. Listener discretion is highly advised.
Welcome to another episode. Mikey on mute, your mind's implode. He's coming off mute for you. Feel the vibe, it's something new.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Mikey on Mute. As always, I'm your host, Mikey, coming off mute, not just to talk about my mental health, but talk to others about their journeys and keep this conversation moving forward. Today, I am very excited to have a very special guest on the show. My guest today is a survivor of trauma, including multiple assaults, domestic violence, a suicide attempt, and more. A person who is still healing and growing each and every day. She has a master's degree in forensic psychology, a bachelor's degree in criminal justice, making sure I got all of these, plus a minor in psychology, which has equipped her with both professional knowledge and a deep understanding of human behavior. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome my guest today, Caralyn Dreyer. Caralyn, how are you?
Well, that was like the world's best introduction. That
I
was
was trying
amazing.
to capture as much as I could because you have so many accomplishments. You've done so much, and I really just wanted to try to give you at least that boost up, and I really appreciate it. We've been talking for a while, and I'm excited to have you here.
I'm so excited to be here.
Excellent. And I appreciate, and I know we've been talking for a while, but as far as for everyone listening, I don't know if you just want to give a quick, like 1 to 2 minute who you are, what you do, and how we connected, and I'd love to kind of go from there.
Sure. Not really during the day. It's a work from home job. I'm a writing tutor. So those hours are whenever I make them. So I do that throughout the day. And then I just started a mental health blog last November. So that keeps me pretty busy. And then on the side, I'll occasionally submit like freelance writing pieces to different publications, mostly just sharing certain parts of my healing journey. And then I also am a mom. So that also keeps me busy. He'll be 10 this year. I'm like, oh my gosh, we made it through a decade. We're still standing. So yeah. And that's pretty much, I think I answered all your questions.
I think so. It's so cool to talk parent to parents. I have a 13-year-old and a 16-year-old. Every day I'm like, how did we make it this far? I'm not sure. But it is so cool. Like, it's one of my favorite things. I've done a lot of different things in life, but I think being a dad has probably been like top of the list favorite thing. I don't know how it is for you. Is being a mom, it's got to be right up there as well.
Absolutely. I mean, you learn so much when you become a parent if you allow yourself the opportunity to do so. I mean, kids teach you so much. They make you want to be a better person. I mean, it's by far like out of anything I'll ever accomplish, being a mom, raising a kind human being, I'm set for life if that's all I ever do, you know?
Yeah, then that's how I feel. I want to leave this world better, and if I can raise a good human to do that as we go forward, then awesome, I've done it. But I mean, speaking of accomplishments, here you are with, like I said, your master's degree in forensic psychology, a bachelor's degree in criminal justice, minor in psychology. You have definitely got some accomplishments under your belt, and I'm very intrigued. And as we kind of get into this, I want to learn a little bit more about what drove you towards those topics and majors and everything like that. But first and foremost, just major props for getting those, because that's a huge accomplishment in itself. Did you want to go into criminal justice and psychology?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for the compliment. And I don't remember when I first started college, I wanted to be a social worker, not really knowing what that entails. This was also the era of trying to please my parents. So I wanted to pick a profession they would approve of. So my dad's like, yeah, social work's not very practical, which he's not wrong. It's very stressful. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to be an English teacher, but I didn't really want to do that. So I dropped out of school for a while. And when I went back, I was like, you know what? I love like true crime. At that point, I had actually already been a victim of a sexual assault. And then I believe, yep, I had already been in a domestically violent relationship. I said that weird. So I don't know if I wanted to understand why people do that. I'm pretty sure at the heart of it, I just wanted to understand like why do people do stuff like that to people? And believe it or not, I briefly considered being in the police academy because I was like, oh my gosh, I want to be a cop. But then I was like, okay, I'm 4'11". So who's going to take me seriously when I pull them over? These are all probably like kind of, I mean, it's not wrong to think that way. And then the other thing, I was like, I'm a woman. I was like, I'm not trying to put up with whatever type of barriers I'm going to have to cross through because it's a typically male dominated profession, you know? So I also was like, I feel like I'll probably cry easily and they might just be like, lady, I don't think this is, this is for you. You got to get out of here. So I was briefly considering probation, like being a juvenile probation officer. Life happened in between there. I attempted to move to Florida and become a juvenile detention officer again. When I started the job, I was on break. And so they had a poster with the statistics for how often they had to like physically restrain people. And I was like, oh gosh, those odds are not in my favor. Again, my size, and the kids were sizing me up when I took a tour. So I was like, oh my gosh, I don't think this is the capacity that I want to work with the youth. So I worked at that job for 4 days. I was like, oh man, I got to figure something out. I have my bachelor's degree at this point. And then I was like, well, if I get into grad school, you know, maybe that'll help me get a better job, blah, blah, blah. And then I was like, forensic psychology, I can still do the criminal part and the psychology part. And so it just materialized into that. And I think at the heart of it, the psychology thing is I wanted to understand myself and just certain circumstances and stuff.
What a great story. Like all these different options that almost were to be, and it's so cool to see. And I imagine it. I mean, I'm only about a foot higher at 5'11", so, but at 4'11", I can imagine it's probably a little bit tough to be taken seriously and intimidated and all that stuff. So, but I think that's great, understanding the psychology of what happened, what goes on in the world, because it's fascinating. The
Mhm.
world doesn't make sense a lot of the times, and at the base of it, we're problem solvers. We want to understand. It feels good when we can put a why to it. So that's pretty spot on. I really dig that.
Yeah. So, yep.
Awesome. Well, I know that you had mentioned, a few of the traumas that you went through at that point in life, and I want to understand how those traumas kind of shaped your experiences in life and kind of impacted your mental health. As far as I want to know, hey, these are not things that happen to everybody in life. Where was your mental state at kind of shortly after? How did you kind of battle through? What strategies you used to deal with it? I just want to get a little bit of glimpse, whatever you're comfortable sharing. I want to understand a
Yeah.
little bit of how your mental health looked at that point.
I would say I think the easiest example to stick with, well, one of the easiest examples to stick with is the domestic violence that I experienced. For sure, once those relationships got further along and the abuse escalated, they were primarily like verbal, psychological abuse, emotional abuse, and my mental health was crap. But at the time, my self-esteem was so low. This was around like, I think 19 or 20 when I was in this relationship. At this point, my self-esteem had just gotten lower and lower and lower as I got older because in childhood, I was bullied. I experienced some racism, little things like that that never really got healed. And so by the time I was like 19 or 20, being in a crappy relationship, as long as they're nice to you sometimes, I just honestly kind of thought I guess this is how it's supposed to be, which is interesting because my parents they're still married. I didn't witness any kind of abuse. I rarely heard them have a disagreement. So from that aspect, for me to think that that was like normal, I think just stems from how low my self-esteem was. And of course, the isolation, you lose friends in those relationships if they don't understand the grip that abuse can have on you. You know, you start to believe all the nasty, mean things that these people tell you, especially if you haven't ever dealt with self-esteem or even understand like what it is. Your friends get frustrated, and I get it. I get it. It's just similar maybe to like someone who's an addict, like the enabling, and you know, they're just like, look, I can help you to get better, but what I'm not going to do is to enable you and help you to stay where you are. But then you start to internalize that stuff as like, oh my gosh, they're giving up on me. I'm stuck with this monster, essentially. What do I do? And the crazy thing, this person actually broke up with me, which is interesting because this person also cheated on me. This person defecated on me. They just did the most rotten things ever. And they broke up with me, which you would think at some point, but you know what? That was life changing. That was life changing because I was forced to get out on my own, became empowered, all that stuff. But my mental health, I believe I started to become a high functioning person with depression and anxiety because I didn't have a choice but to go out and get a job, get my education, be able to not let people see what I had been through. Because at that time I was so ashamed. Like, who's gonna want to deal with me knowing the stuff that I allowed someone to do to me? But it's not so much you allow them to, it's just that I didn't say, hey, think of the nastiest thing you can do to me and bring it on, buddy. You know what I'm saying? Like, these things happen because that person is a monster. So I think because I was high functioning, I did not fully know the damage that was done to my mental health. I just kind of figured like, oh, I'm just sad today. You know what I mean? I didn't really understand what mental health was at that point, to be honest with you. I think I coincided it with psychology more or less instead of looking at it as like a physical health. You have to go to the doctor for your physical health, eat healthy, get sleep, blah, blah, blah. So at that time, I probably, if you had me define what mental health is, outside of like naming different disorders and stuff, I wouldn't have really been able to explain it to you. Um, so, you know, and then you're isolated from family, and it's just, it's a sad place to be when you finally leave this person. Surprisingly enough, you go through depression. It's a grieving process like the end of any relationship, no matter what they did to you. The trauma bond, you know, that's like, you wonder, you know, before I was in a relationship, I am ashamed to admit that I was one of those people that was like, how do people stay in those relationships? If that happened to me, I'd be out of there. That's one of the biggest things of why you never say never. Because once I was in it, I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like such a crappy person because I get it. I get it. You just, unless you have the strength, it's really hard to leave. So I think before that point had been the suicide attempt. Excuse me, my mental health was obviously horrible. I was estranged from my family. I had just recently recovered from alcohol poisoning, from which I almost died, I was told, because this happened after the sexual assault. I did not receive proper counseling for that. So obviously, what do? You numb the feelings. I was college age, so I drank, and I didn't drink until I got to college. So I had no idea what I was doing and got alcohol poisoning. My friend went to jail because of me because she had bought the alcohol. I had to call her mom. It was a crazy time, and one thing just piled on top of the other, and I just couldn't take it anymore one night, and I wrote a letter. I was going to take a bunch of pills, and I thought about my family. And in this case, seeking approval from my family and taking their feelings into such consideration probably actually saved my life in some ways, because I didn't choose to live for myself at that point. So that's where it was a little bit damaging. But I thought of my family and I was like, oh my gosh, they're going to have to tell someone that their child killed themselves. Like, I literally was mapping out what their life would be like without me there. And it was so painful that didn't do it. Obviously, I'm still here, but that was one of the first times I had that lowest point. And again, though, I don't know if I attributed it to mental health. I just was like, didn't have any other solution. Everything was just so overwhelming. I didn't see any end in sight and I just wanted to be done. So when you go through repeated trauma, unless you recognize the damage to your mental health, it just kind of continues. I mean, I had periods of time, obviously, I was able to get college degrees. So I had periods of productivity, but that was only like a momentary thing. When you're sitting alone and you've gotten the degree already and you didn't get the job or whatever, that's when, those mental health challenges come into play. So I think my trauma responses is kind of what allow me to be somewhat productive. To this day, I'm busybody central. I feel extremely uncomfortable doing nothing. I mean, it's ridiculous. Like, I will sometimes sit down and be like, girl, what the heck have you been doing for the last 3 hours that this is the first time you're sitting down, doing pretty much little of nothing most of the time. But I think because of that trauma response of being busy and let me go to school and let me work 2 jobs, I really just didn't have a clue internally what was going on.
I feel that so, so much because to me, if I gave myself time to not be busy, then I was going to start feeling emotions. Then I was going to start, experiencing things that were uncomfortable and not fun to feel. And so it was easier to be productive. It was easier to do something. But yeah, I mean, you have those moments where you're running around and you look back, you're like, what the hell was I doing for hours? Like, they just disassociate and I didn't even clean that much. Like, what's going on? So I hear you, and man, like I said, it spoke right to me.
Yeah, but I also grew up with my mom and my parents. They still work. Like, they could be retired, but they don't like to sit still, which if I had to make an assessment, they've had their own trauma in their past. So I wouldn't be surprised if this was something that was carried on, but it was viewed as, I viewed my mom like as a super mom, and she is a super mom, but she literally did so many different things at one time. And then you're a kid, you think that like, oh, it's amazing. But now having been through trauma, and I know the stuff that my parents have been through, wouldn't doubt it has had an effect on them. And because they were raised with parents who maybe didn't know how to process their emotions, it just kind of carried on. So I always grew up thinking like, oh, well, this is what you do. You work a job, you do this project, you never sit still, you're always busy, you always say yes, yes, yes. But I just thought that was like a personality thing. A lot of my mental health challenges I always viewed as, oh, that's just how I am. Like, I'm lazy when I don't want to take a shower because of my depression, not knowing it was because of my depression. I assume like, ew, you're just like a dirty, lazy girl, basically. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, I mean, we're raised not to recognize these characteristics of mental health, and instead kind of judge ourselves and hold ourselves such a high standard. So we see it, oh, we're just failing. That's all we're doing. We're just failing.
Yep.
I get that.
Yeah.
It's so, so tough. First off, I mean, huge thank you for feeling safe and to share all of that. What experiences you've gone through, that it's definitely a lot, and I appreciate you sharing your story and the different caveats to it. Like, yeah, when we talk about domestic abuse relationships, a majority of those are talking about the victim leaving before the abuser is. In your case, the abuser left, which, yeah, like, brought up some weird grieving things because you're still grieving that relationship and learning what life and love is supposed to be at 19 and 20. And it's amazing that you were able to take that and kind of just turn it around, and maybe a few bumps in the road, but I mean, really bring out just this golden side of yourself. So again, I appreciate you sharing with that, and that made me really happy. I just wanted to kind of get that in while we
Aw.
were still thinking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I have spent so many years, keeping things inside out of shame and all these things, but it's like there's people out there who need to hear these things. And certainly, my son will learn of these things as he gets older. I'm going to be very open. I'm not going to tell him every single thing. Obviously, you got those skeletons you got to keep in the closet, but the things that matter, like, look, mom went through these things. I'm still standing. I fought through them. Also the aspect in there of teaching him that you can't always believe what someone says, but you need to really look at what they show you. As I told him, there's people out there who look like they're kind, they'll say things to you, but they're really doing that with bad intentions. And so I feel like some of the trauma that I went through has equipped me to at least hopefully do some preventative things as far as my son is concerned. And me educating myself about mental health over the years and all that stuff, I didn't have that luxury. And, in the 80s and 90s, I mean, it was more about like war on drugs. I know mental health and stuff was around, but I know in my household and community, I don't really remember talking about it. So I have to do things different for my son and teach him that especially him being a male.
Yeah.
It's hard for you guys to be out there with mental health struggles and advocating for it. And it's okay to feel emotions and everything I just said. Guys are survivors and victims of those things as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you seeing that side of things and all that. It's really tough for everybody because yeah, none of us really grew up talking about mental health. We had bigger things to worry about. At least what we thought. We thought there was things that were higher importance and all that than mental health, but it really does kind of bring it to light as you start to learn and grow and heal, and then as you become a parent. I have two boys, you're a mom to a boy, like it's something that you want to make sure that they have a better view of the world when it comes to mental health and understanding as not only just a boy mom but a person that's gone through all of this in life. I always want to try to figure out like what advice for men, how can men be better members as far as like understanding mental health, talking about it. Like if you could give advice to your son or give advice to me or a friend or anything like that, how can we as men approach mental health in a better way?
I think the number one thing that I try to teach my son as a male is that showing feelings, especially like the more vulnerable feelings, is not a sign of being weak. It's not. I mean, I think I've just actually been learning that in the past year or so because I know my dad, I only saw him cry, I think, one time in my whole life. And at the time, I was thinking like, "Oh my gosh, he's so strong, like so stoic." And now as an adult and knowing what I know about mental health and the stigmas and all that stuff, it's like that was actually it is admirable to a certain extent, but at the same time, it's like I grew up learning that emotion when you show emotions, you're showing your weakness. And that was so detrimental because it just made me not feel safe to show my emotions. So I make sure that my son, cry if you need to cry. I don't want you to like spend your whole day doing that, but I just want him to know like it's okay to express those emotions, to be sad. Everybody's entitled to express their emotions, so that's, I think the key thing is we have to reframe the release and the processing of emotions as a sign of strength. Because it is to say, I'm willing to sit here and be pissed off about this situation so that I can move on, or sit here and cry for 2 days straight so that I can move forward. That's what we got to really challenge ourselves to do as males, females, everybody.
And I love that you have that approach and that you're teaching them that way. For a long time, I definitely hid my emotions because yeah, as a man, I was raised you provide for the family, you take care of everybody. You don't have time to worry about emotions and all of that. And we see it in movies and all this. Yeah, if you start to tear up or feel a certain way, there's some bullying that happens. So the more we can change that narrative, the better. I know in the last couple of years for me, especially those last probably 2 years, vulnerability has been such a work in progress for me. I have thought for the longest time that if I'm vulnerable with somebody, they're probably going to leave. They're going to think I'm weak or think something badly of me, and they're going to leave my life. And so for me, it was, if I want to keep these people in my life, I'm going to hold all these emotions in and not talk about it. So I think just being able to be vulnerable, and like, it's major props to me going with my therapist, working with my wife has brought out a lot of those hard conversations in me. Friends that can actually have, like, hey, no, it's okay to talk about this. So I hear you on that vulnerability. It is tough to do, but it is a game changer once you're able to start talking about it.
Absolutely. And excuse me, it's like I aspired to be that strong person. Like I can recall when my grandmother died, when my grandmothers died, I felt so proud of myself because I didn't cry during the funeral. Like, no, 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 I shouldn't have been proud of that. Another, like, after the sexual assault happened, literally hours after it happened, I was eating Easter dinner with my family and didn't cry, nothing. I had deep fingernail marks in my arm to hold that in, but that's just a testament to how I viewed emotions from childhood and how not addressing it just snowballed and snowballed. I mean, I'll be perfectly honest with you. I think because I was so much in shock is one of the reasons I was able to not show emotions. But it's like, good God, like it's terrible that I felt that I had to do that. I think that's the main point is and I've never actually verbally told my parents, even to this day. I'm 43 years old. I'm sure they have heard about it through the family grapevine or whatever, which is fine with me. I mean, but it's just, it's sad that I grew up feeling that emotions were a sign of weakness and that I was just going to be judged. So even in the worst emotional storm, I didn't feel like I could reach out to the people who I thought were closest to me. And this is no diss against them, because at the same time, I am very cognizant now as an adult of the limitations that my parents had when it came to emotions and maybe feeling uncomfortable. I can't imagine now being a parent having my child come tell me like the worst thing in the world was done to them, but I feel sad for myself that I took that upon myself to spare them and decided to just carry an extra burden because of my perspective on emotions.
I can't even like wrap my head around something so terrible happening and then almost having to make an immediate decision. Like, I can't disappoint them by either not showing up to dinner or showing up upset. Like, the emotional labor that had to take to basically take everything and like that had to do with your emotions and what you were feeling and put it to the side. That's heavy. That's really, really heavy. And I don't know how we're able to do that. Like, I understand a little bit, like when mom passed, I was able to put it a little bit to the side, but like this is a whole other thing. Like, you just went and had to kind of, I guess, put a mask on and pretend everything was all right for Easter dinner. So like I said, my heart goes out to you because I can't even imagine having to do that.
You know, to be honest though, I'm not surprised because at this point, I thought about this, and a lot of major things that I experienced, we'll say in late elementary school through high school. Do you know who I talked to my emotions about? My journal. Now, while that's a freeing exercise, unfortunately, that was not enough for me to have processed. Like, I remember this boy I had a crush on. I was writing him a love note. He died in a car accident the night before. Yes. And
Goodness.
I was devastated, but I felt so silly. I was like, oh my gosh, people are going to think I'm so silly for being sad about this kid dying that I had a crush on. I was devastated, but I didn't talk to anybody about it because I was like, oh my gosh, people are going to think I'm weird. So I never talked about it. I wrote about it in my journal. I wrote him a note to kind of like honor that situation. But a lot of the hard stuff I faced, the bullying, the development of an eating disorder. These are things that I talked about with a couple of trusted people, but because I was a minor, they forced me to go talk to a counselor. So for me, the trust was gone after that. So by the time I got to the sexual assault, to be honest with you, I have been so used to finding a release for my emotions and then being able to box it up from childhood up until that point. So it honestly doesn't surprise me that I could do that, because I had always thought when you cry, like, oh, you're just being really sensitive. Well, what's wrong with that? I think it's just because if parents feel uncomfortable, and I was more sensitive maybe than my siblings, I think it really did make them feel a little uncomfortable, like, oh, like, what do we do here? So it's tough. It's really tough, but it just shows, especially when you become a parent, or even if you don't become a parent, like once you get these insights, we got to spread them around and raise awareness and just have more acceptance.
Yeah, and I can understand when you talk about from childhood to that point, you've learned how to kind of box things up and go forward. And I had been talking to my therapist at one point, and something struck me like gold. It was, these things, although they're unhealthy coping mechanisms or they're not ways to get through, at some point in our lives, they were super helpful. They were how we got through it. They were kind of good friends of ours, and he kind of said it like, this is your friend that you used to be friends with, and now they're kind of not doing good things, but you still kind of hold them, a special place in your heart, even if they're being bad. And that one kind of hit me like, man, you're right. Like the things I was doing were not good, but they were helpful at that point. So that insight helps me understand. And so I definitely can resonate a little bit with the, I worked at one point, so I'm going to keep going with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And plus, I think too, when we see that it like works for us, we might be less likely to see the level of like attention we really should be paying to that type of thing. I feel like, okay, I use this coping mechanism, I turned out fine, I'm good. Not maybe realizing that it was a survival technique as opposed to like maybe something that's more sustainable, in the long run.
Yeah. And I think that's hard to see in that moment because I feel like at least when I've gone through some extreme situations or emotions, I'm worried about the next 5 minutes. Like, how am I going to get through right now? So I'm not worried about if my coping mechanism is going to do something 6 months down the road for me, or I'm worried about right then and there. So it can be so tough to I think trying to look back and understand, okay, that wasn't great, but let's grow from it, not taking that and making like a self hatred or anything like that. We
Yeah.
all used it at some point. It worked. And how can we do it a little bit differently going forward? And those are the victories I like when I go, well, I can look back and see, 2 years ago, I would have handled this situation like this. And now I handle it like this. And like, hey, that's my victory for today. I'm going to at least put in my phone app, like in my notes app,
Yeah.
and look at it later so that way I can. And just a little reminder to keep myself a little grateful towards myself because self compassion is really hard for me. And I know you talked a little bit about self esteem earlier and how that can all really, really kind of drive us wild if it's not very high. So I really want to understand, I guess, like now that you have a little bit better grasp on how the psychology of it all works and the coping mechanisms, and you're in a good healing journey here. If you had to give advice to anyone that's dealing with an abusive situation or having to process something terrible that has happened to them, I know that's kind of a blanket statement, but I don't want to get too niche here and specific, but I guess what would you kind of say if you could either, I don't know if you want to look at it like speaking to your younger self or somebody else, what advice or steps would you wish that they would do from that point?
I think the the number one theme that I always come back to is how it's hard for us to be uncomfortable. And because it's hard for us to be uncomfortable, I feel like it's harder to be fully engaged in the healing process. Like you have to be so intentional. I say like I used to think I was going to like heal by osmosis. Like I admit these things are wrong. I talk about him a little bit and the healing's all going to just like, it's all going to come to me and I'm going to be fine. But that's not how it works. Like, you have to get up every day and be like, no, we were pissed about this yesterday. We had no control over it. Today's a new day. We're going to focus on you. You have to teach yourself that stuff. I mean, you have to you literally have to talk to yourself about it, unless, you're going to therapy and stuff like that. But even then, you spend a lot of time with yourself. So I think it's just important to be able to be uncomfortable, but to do it with intention. So I think there's a balance. We don't always want to put a label on things. Sometimes we need to just let things come in and let them go out. But then there's other times where, yes, if it's a recurring thing, that's when I sit back and I'm like, okay, why does this keep happening? Why does this certain situation heighten my anxiety? And because of the way my brain processes things, like down to the teeniest, tiniest detail of a cause, it often works. And I'm like, okay, now that I know why it's happening, now I can figure out how to address it in the right way. But again, you got to have the energy and the intention to want to do that stuff, because even when you do go to therapy or you're on medication, there's still work that you have to do. You got to be willing to do the work. And it just unfortunately means being uncomfortable. I think about that as a parent. Like, so often I want my son to always be comfortable. You know what I mean? Like, for example, he can be picky about the way his clothing fits. And a lot of times I'll give in and let him change. But sometimes I'll make him go to school like that, because if I keep making things comfortable for him, what is he going to do later on with bigger things? The way your pants fit as a kid is the biggest thing, maybe. But when you get to be an adult and you're going through a breakup or whatever it might be, because your mom always allowed you to change your clothes or do whatever every time you were uncomfortable, they're going to be like me. I didn't know how to be uncomfortable. And it's not really my parents' fault because of what they didn't know. But I just think being uncomfortable and intentional are, to me, the cornerstones of the healing process. And it's not easy, because you have to admit a lot of things that you probably don't want to admit. While I was not at fault for being abused, there were certain things that weren't in place that maybe made it harder for me to see warning signs. And again, it's hard to have these conversations without making myself be to blame, but I have to take ownership, because I ended up in other abusive relationships. I ended up with other toxic boyfriends. What was the common denominator? You're looking at it. So, I have to figure out, what am I lacking that I'm seeking these types of relationships out or sticking with them because I need the bare minimum to feel worthy? What am I doing? And it sucks. Just to be honest, it sucks. Just like you don't want someone pointing out things to you, I don't want to point things out to myself at all, but you have to. I'm sorry, there's just no way around it. There were times where I had anxious attachments. So you don't answer my phone call, I'm redialing as many times as I feel like it. Okay. That's not healthy, but I had to admit that I'm doing some of these kind of obsessive things. It doesn't put me in the best light as girlfriend of the year, perhaps, but maybe I'll get there now that I've addressed what this is. So just being uncomfortable and really engaging and being intentional is so important.
Yeah, sitting that uncomfortable sucks. You're right. That it's not fun at all, but it's so powerful. For me, the anxiety was always about the uncomfortable and the unknown, and I didn't want to feel that. I didn't want to. I would pre-plan every scenario and outcome that would happen. Even if I had, say, came into this conversation, maybe I would have played out 17 different answers to the question I was going to ask you, So that way I had no uncomfortable surprises and all that stuff. And that was not doing anything. It was just kind of enabling myself, kind of like we were talking about earlier. And yeah, when you speak about accountability, that's tough to do because we as humans really want to believe that we're right. Like we're doing the right thing. And so to take that reflection and go, all right, maybe there is some growth from my side that needs to happen. That is a really hard and tough conversation to have with yourself. So major props to anyone that is able to take a little bit of time and reflection, because I don't do what I can for accountability, but it's not my favorite feeling in the world. So it's something that I could probably continue to add into my everyday as well.
Yeah, and I think too, it really is just a learning process. And I mean, I would love to meet whomever is out there that's got it all together and cannot relate to these things. I truly would, because it's like, how? And I'm sure there are people out there, but then you have to wonder, is that like they truly have had the perfect life, or are they that good at covering things up? Because I just feel like the older you get, you just get sick of your own crap. It's like, it's like, gosh, like we're doing this again, decade number 2, we're still here. But it's easy to get tired of the process. It really is. Every other week, I want to quit social media. I want to stop sharing my story. I want to go back into hiding. But that's how things perpetuate. That's how stigmas perpetuate. And I'm not saying everyone out in the world, you must share your dirtiest secrets. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, like, we have to just be willing to be open with things. And when people are open, like not judging, which is hard. I mean, I'm a Virgo, so I'm very critical, like extreme. You want to know what's wrong with your paper? I'll tell you what's wrong with your paper, but it's all a learning process. And you can't ever think, I thought by my age, I'd have half of the stuff I'm just learning, like already figured out.
Oh yeah.
But, that's just not a thing.
No, I get that. I thought I'd have a lot more figured out at 35 than I do. So I have a lot to learn yet. And yeah, I mean, I have my own stubbornness. I'm a Taurus. We're coming into Taurus season, so like but yeah, it's kind of one of those things that you said it best, that at some point we get to the age where we're sick of our own shit. And I love that. Like that speaks to me. And yeah, we got to take that accountability. So yeah, I don't think there's anyone out there that has that perfect life. I think it's a lot more of just like masking it up. So hopefully more people just have authentic conversations, even if it's with
Yes.
themselves. So, and I love that we're talking about this. I want to make sure we talk about Darkness to Dialogue, Living Well with Mental Illness, your mental health blog. And I really want you to just take time, because I know that this was a big piece when we were speaking, like, hey, what can we make sure we talk about? You're like, please, let's, touch on the mental health blog. So take a few moments and be proud of it and tell everybody what is Darkness to Dialogue about.
Well, I came up with the name because I always want to make sure that I'm communicating all sides of mental health, like the lovely, flowers and rainbows at the end of, the recovery process, but also the darkness, because that's the stuff we need to talk about. And so the Darkness to Dialogue is, I was like, well, I do want that dark stuff to be in there, but I also want to have a positive spin. So I'm turning these dark moments into a dialogue that we can talk about, so people don't feel like they're alone. Outside of creating the platform that it's on, I built this blog from scratch. Like I'm a writer, so I was good on that part. But like robot tags and all these other weird terminologies, the SEO, I didn't have any clue about any of that stuff. But I was like, number one, I'm broke, so I'm not going to pay somebody to do this stuff for me. So I have to figure it out. But also, it's just, there's something in learning how to do something from scratch or from the beginning on your own. And I didn't want it to be just about, I wanted to share my personal experiences, but because of the academic side of me, I don't really like to actually give any kind of suggestion or advice to anybody unless I know that this is maybe like a research thing, or this is a thing. Even my son will ask me something. If I don't know the answer, I don't just guess. I literally look it up because I don't want to tell him the wrong thing. So I was like, I feel like the blog would be beneficial if I explain my personal experiences, but then I have like a scientific or like a academic backing for why these things happen. Like knowing that they happen and the signs and the symptoms is awesome, but understanding like in our brains and our bodies and all that stuff, why some of these symptoms occur or why we have some of these challenges, I feel like that's a side that is important. And I'm such an academic person that I had to include that aspect because I ended up deciding not to complete my doctorate degree, which was extremely heartbreaking. It was so hard, but I was like, you know what? This is my chance to kind of use like those research skills and all that stuff that I learned, and it won't have been like a waste. I can still have like the educational aspect, but still have the real personal side of it as well. And the blog was actually born from a really negative, crazy situation. I was supposed to work with a PR person. That went down the tubes because of my investigative skills. I looked at some things in this person's past and decided I was headed for a disaster. And I had actually become friends with this person. So it was hard. It was really hard. I was pissed as you know what, knowing what this person had in store for me. And I wasn't wrong. I actually found out information later on that I wasn't wrong, but I was so pissed. I was crying. I was upset. And I was like, what am I going to do now? Because I had kind of planned stuff out. And I was like, oh my gosh, so what am I going to do? I'm going to show this, you know what, that they didn't stop me. You trying to screw me over didn't stop me. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to start my blog because that was something I had wanted to do back in like, I think 2019, but my ex-husband laughed at me when I brought up the idea. He's like, oh, why would you want to do that? And I was like crushed. And so I gave it up. And I was like, you know what? Now I get to finally do it. And so I took literal anger. I took all of that anger and spent hours, days, weeks researching how do you build a blog? How should I set it up? How the keywords, all the stuff that's involved. I used all that being mad and all those emotions and stuff to turn it into something good. And it did help me cope with, grieving the friendship of that person and all these things. And it really, I feel like turns something negative into something positive that not only helps me, but is hopefully going to help other people.
And that's beautiful. Taking what you could have just had those emotions, that anger, that sadness, and you could have just walked away from the idea of the blog and been upset. And I don't think anyone would have blamed you. That would have been valid. So for you to be able to still take that and turn it into motivation and not only create a blog, a successful blog, like this thing is great, like this is amazing.
Aw.
And to be able to reach out, I know that, it's always good when someone can say like, hey, I read what you wrote or heard what you said and it made a difference. And so I'm telling you, like, I have checked out your blog. It's a good little, if I need a little pick me up throughout the day, I'll just head on over there and read one of the pages. And even if I have like 45 seconds to just kind of get over there and do something. So I appreciate it from my side personally. Have you had any of these experiences of people reaching out about the blog, whether it's to tell you how great it is or if you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, I've had a few people reach out and say that they thought it was helpful. They like how everything is formatted. I've had one guest blogger so far, and she said that she enjoyed her experience, and it just helps you to meet other people. And then, I'm fairly decent at statistics, so I check out the Google Analytics. And for some of the articles, like the top views are coming from the Netherlands, Hong Kong, Singapore, Mexico. Like, actually, the international friends are beating us American friends out here. But I would have actually never anticipated that it would go much beyond like a few of my faithful followers on social media. But that is also why I added the translate feature on there, because I was like, well, here we go. And surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, mental health is just now gaining momentum in a lot of European countries, which I plan to hopefully do some kind of feature about that because I find that fascinating. Like, we've come so far and still have way more to go, but it's amazing that people are just now starting to jump on the train with that. It's awesome, but it's also so sad that so many different cultures and generations have just literally been suffering for years and years. And because of stigmas and all that stuff, just felt like alone. And I'm glad for my blog to be a place for, even like you said, if someone's feeling alone or whatever they're feeling, if they just pop on there and it lifts their spirits even while they're just on there, that's, that's all I need.
And it's been great. Like, there have been times where I've caught the last, 30 seconds of you being live on Instagram or something, and just like a quick, like, hey, how's it going, Mikey? And it, like, that made my morning, and the rest of the morning went well and all that. So just, you're doing an incredible work, and it's always great to see those people reaching out. So I'm glad that's happening to you, because honestly, you should be very proud of it. And so from me to you, like I said, huge kudos on the blog. I love the videos you put together for Instagram. It's all a very positive experience. So we don't get told enough. You're making a positive impact on this world.
Thank you so much. And believe it or not, it's actually a small miracle I'm even doing half of these things because of like the social anxiety that I have been challenged with. Like, I mean, a year ago, you would have never seen me doing those videos, but now it's like, I'm just going to put myself out there. And there's people like you that it is helping. And if other people are annoyed, like, oh my God, this girl again, well, so be it. I still caught their attention for the day, right? So
Right.
something's working.
Yeah,
But it's
absolutely.
just, I really appreciate the support and the feedback for sure. Because a lot of times I'm not always in the mood, but knowing it's helping others, it really would hurt my heart if I just quit it one day and somebody was looking for it and it wasn't there. Like, that would make me feel so bad. So I'm happy to hear that it's helping people.
Yeah, absolutely. I get that with the podcast too. There are days where I'm like, I don't know if am I going to keep going with episodes and all that. And it's like, what if somebody's expecting this to drop and it doesn't? And so I feel that you have that kind of social responsibility. I get it. For sure. As we come to the end of the show here, I always kind of like to make sure this is still a two-way conversation. And so I always turn to my guests and go, do you have any kind of question for me, whether that's a personal life question, podcast, or anything random that's been on your mind, or you want to pick my brain over? What do you got for me?
I would want to ask you if there was like one misconception, or not, maybe I won't limit you because I'm bad at giving one thing, but what kind of misconceptions about like mental health or even mental illness would you want to tell people that you either come across, like maybe you've educated people, like, no, that's not how it is, or what are some of those misconceptions that you would be able to like explain, I guess?
Yeah, and that's a great question. As far as there's a lot of misunderstood things when it comes to mental health. Again, I'm not a professional on this. This is just me talking about my experiences and all that. But I think I would really challenge people that have maybe a negative thought on people going to therapy. I know a lot of times when we were growing up, we didn't talk about people going to therapy. It was more so you talked about the extremes. If somebody went to a mental institution or something like that. And so I always say, like, you don't need to hit rock bottom to talk to a therapist. And I think if more people just gave it a shot, they would have a little bit less stigma about what it can be. Because if you have never been to therapy and you're only relying on what people have told you or what you see in movies, you're probably going to have a little bit of a skewed idea. And it probably does bring up those feelings of this person is weak or weird or something, that they have to go talk to somebody. But even if you give it like 3 sessions to go sit down for 45 minutes and experience what it's like to go to a therapist, I think that would really change a lot of people's views. And that would be a hope for me to get out there, that people would stop seeking help as kind of this weird thing, or that you have to be severely like at the edge or at the end of your rope to get it. Because I thought that for a long time. That's kind of what led to my attempt in 2020, as far as like, I didn't think I would go to a therapist. I was just like, things are bad, I'm going to end it. Like, there was no
Mhm.
part of that equation that therapist came into. So I would say, seek out, because even if nothing terrible is happening, we all have stuff to talk about. It's always good to talk about it. And if it provides some feedback and perspective on how therapy works, I think the world would be better from that point of view.
Yeah, that's great. The therapy thing, that's a big thing for me too. And I think people need to understand there's so many different forms of therapy. There's
Yeah.
literally something for everyone. So I think that's great because I'm one that I say I'm never going to tell people go to therapy, because I can't tell how someone else maybe needs to cope with their things. But I do say, if you are waiting till the last minute at the rock bottom and you can't function with everyday things, it doesn't hurt to seek out, some kind of guidance or whatever. But I think that's a huge misconception, is that therapy just doesn't work, and of course there's bad experiences, but in general, it's a great resource for sure.
Yeah, and it's going to be one of those things that is going to be a little trial and error, just like different
Yeah.
medications and different coping mechanisms, that you might have to go through a couple therapists to find one that works for you. Just kind of how life works, almost like you're swiping through Tinder for therapists, basically, at this point. And sometimes you got to get through a few bad dates to get to that good one, and
Yep.
that's kind of what I always say. And yeah, and in the state of the world we live in, it is getting more and more difficult to get into a mental health like therapist or facility in like a good amount, or like a soon time. Like, it takes a lot of weeks sometimes to even be seen by somebody. So
Hmm.
I always say, like, if you are having an inkling of feeling like maybe therapy is something you want to explore, put that out there, get in line, and hopefully the world gets a little bit quicker. And, as mental health starts to take a little bit more of a light here, that we get to be better about that. So I won't speak terribly too much about the world. I just want it to be a little bit
Yeah.
quicker and more accessible for people.
Absolutely, I agree.
Excellent. I have to say, like, this has been such an amazing conversation. I can't believe we've been sitting here talking for an hour. That flew by.
It
Like,
did.
time just went on. And so I know that this is not going to be our last conversation, and I'm excited for that.
Yes.
Before we wrap up, anything else that you wanted to make sure the listeners heard, or anything else from me?
I think just the overall message, like, if you struggle with your mental health, this doesn't even mean that you necessarily have a mental illness. But if you struggle with your mental health, like, it's okay. You're not alone. You really are not alone. That's one of the biggest things I've learned, is that I'm not alone. There's so many of us out here that can relate and support, and just keep fighting the fight every day. Just keep fighting the fight.
Some great words. Listeners, you can find Darkness to Dialogue, Living Well with Mental Illness at carolyndreyer.blogspot.com. I will make sure that that is all spelled out and linked. On Instagram, it's Caralyn_Dreyer. I'm going to spell it out for everyone listening. That is CARALYN_DREYER, just so everyone can get right to it and all that. If you're following me on Instagram, I'll be sharing this out and you can follow it from there. But Carolyn, just a huge thank you to you for taking time. We've been such good like social media buddies. This has been awesome. So thank you for jumping on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed myself, and will definitely be keeping in touch for sure. And keep doing what you're doing, because you're allowing people like me to like have a voice and just kind of be able to share perspectives on things. So thank you so much.
I appreciate the kind words. Before I go on and on about how awesome Carolyn's blog is, this is Mikey going back on mute. Until next time, thanks everyone.
This episode of Mikey on Mute is brought to you by Little Jerk Society. Little Jerk Society is a clothing company fueled by the raw energy of creative rebellion, celebrating those who march to the beat of their own drum. They care deeply about mental health and believe in a world where everyone can thrive, regardless of their challenges.
Use promo code MikeyOnMute to save 15% on your order at littlejerkclothing.com. Again, that's littlejerkclothing.com. And remember, use promo code MikeyOnMute, all one word, to save yourself 15%. Go off and make a change.